After completely losing my creativity last year and hardly making anything, this year it feels like I haven't stopped knitting, crocheting, and sewing, and generally just having lots of fun. And part of that journey back to creativity has been helped along by watching podcasters on YouTube sharing their own creative journeys, the patterns that they're making, and the mistakes and the mods that they've made. And I found that really inspiring. And so I thought I'd have a go at doing my own attempt at a podcast episode. So I'm going to share not all of them, but some of the projects that I've been working on. I've got different levels of skill across the different hobbies. And so there are quite a few mistakes. There are a couple of tips as well. And if you stick around to the end, I will give you a sneak peek of a new design that I have started working on, which has been completely inspired by all of the other projects that I've worked on throughout the year. Hi, I'm Sonia and welcome or welcome back. I am a creative, a gentle, slow business owner, and I'm trying to do both of those things whilst navigating midlife. And before I go any further, I would like to say a huge thank you to everybody who commented, sent me private messages, and even spoke with me at Festival of Quilts a couple of weeks back on my last video about menopause and how it had impacted my creativity. It's one of those situations where I wish that other people weren't going through the things that I went through, but at the same time, there is a level of comfort in knowing that it hasn't only affected me in that way. And so if you haven't seen that video and it's a topic that you think might be of interest to you, I'll put a link somewhere. But a huge thank you to everyone that shared their own experiences with me. It really means a lot. So before we dive into looking at all the different things that I've been making, I just want to give a bit of background as to my approach to making and how things have changed because of my experience with menopause and how it's impacted me. It has completely changed the things that I want to wear. And if I'm being totally honest, I think that there were probably a couple of years where I didn't really care what I wore. And that feels quite a sad thing to say. But I think because I was struggling so much, it was just something I had to do in order to take the dog out or to get up. But it wasn't something that I took enjoyment in. And then added on top of that is the fact that my core body temperature seems to have increased massively. And it's one of those things, when I was in my 20s, I remember noticing that women in their 50s seem to gravitate towards loose, flowy clothing and just thinking, why is that? And now that I'm here, I know it's because the hot flushes for me were dreadful and I cannot wear tight clothing. It has to be natural fibres because it helps me to regulate my temperature more, and I need layers so that I can regulate my temperature more. And I'm finding it really hard because I always used to be cold. I've always loved winter. I've always loved, lots of layers, lots of jumpers. And so I'm now at a point where it feels like my wardrobe doesn't really suit me anymore. So as I've kind of gone back into my creativity, I have been getting rid of, and by getting rid of, I mean sending to charity shops, scrap stores, schools, friends, any fabric or yarn that is not a natural fibre because I just can't wear it. I know that I wouldn't wear the finished object. And I'm also trying to be much more sensible around choosing styles of clothing that will fit my lifestyle and how I want to wear things, and will also give me flexibility. So have I got things that I can layer up, stuff like that. So hopefully that makes some sense. And what's the other thing? I'm also trying to go through and use what I have. So I don't have a huge collection of fabric and that, I think, but I do have enough. I've got quite a lot of quilting cottons. I've got some selections of dressmaking fabrics, and I have some yarn as well, which I've had for a while. So I have been very much trying to use what I already have rather than just going out and buying new things. So having said all that, shall we get started? So I'm going to start with dressmaking and sewing. And the first thing that I have to share is a hat. So I made this for my son because he needed a hat that gave him better sun coverage. And this is a pattern that I've made before. It's the Sorrento bucket hat by LB Textiles. I think if you have teens, trying to make for them and make them something that they'll wear is not always the easiest of things. And I've made one of these in the past for my daughter, so I knew that it would have a fair chance of being liked by my son. And the fun thing with this project is that I repurposed a pair of jeans that were no longer salvageable, and I made a feature of the side seam on the legs. So where the instructions asked you to cut on the fold, I lined up the fold with the seam and then cut out. And because of all of the layers, I have a fairly good machine, but it wouldn't have liked all the layers. When I put the pattern together, I offset the seam feature just so that it goes round nicely and stitched together nicely. And I used some cotton that I had on the inside. It's a really nice pattern. It's an afternoon make. The only tip that I would give is, even if it's denim on the outer, which I think adds a really nice structure, I wouldn't want to use cotton for both, I think, or I do want to use a lot of interfacing, but I still add interfacing to the brim because it just helps with the structure. But yeah, it's a really fun make, and I now need to make one for me because it has really nice sun coverage, and I think this is the size large, but highly recommend it, and it's liked by teens. So the next finished project I've got to share is the Bestie bag, and this is a pattern that's been out for ages. It's by Blackbird Fabrics. I wanted a slouchy bag that I could take with me to Wonderwool when I went earlier in the year, and this seemed like a good one to make. I used some Liberty cord that I've had in my stash for years. I think I bought a meter of it with the idea of making a skirt way back when, and I'm not going to be making a skirt that only needs 1 meter of fabric now. So it felt like a lovely way of using it because the fabric is gorgeous. The pattern came together really well. This is the medium size. The only things that I changed were the pocket construction, because the pattern asks you to fold the hem over twice and then top stitch it. And personally, I always like to have a double folded pocket because I think it's a bit stronger, it looks nicer on the inside, and it just gives it a bit of extra strength. So I doubled the height of the finished pocket, and that worked really well. And again, I had some old backing fabric that I used for the lining. The other thing was the strap. Because I only had a meter of fabric, I had to join fabric for the strap, which is here. You can't really see it with the cord fabric, which is quite nice. But if you have to do the same, I don't think it says anything in the pattern, but if you're new to sewing, I would always recommend joining the strap like you would a quilt binding, so sewing it at 45 degrees, because it just helps to distribute the seam allowance across the strap. And then I used some scissors just to trim the bulk of the seam before joining it all together. But it works really well. I love the bag. I don't know if I'd ever make the big one because it would be huge. I think it would like be down to my knees, but it holds loads and I use it all the time. And yeah, it's really nice. Highly recommend the pattern. And that's it for finished sewing objects. I haven't done much dressmaking, partly because I think I'm still trying to decide what clothes will sort of fit my life and everything else. So I've got a mental list of things that I would like to do, but nothing that I've actually made. On my wish list is another pair of chanterelle pants, which I've made before in denim. And they're so comfy and I love wearing them, but I think I want a full length pair. I think maybe in a brown, I don't know, but I think they'd be really lovely in winter. And I've got a new dress that I bought from Fat Face, but I haven't worn it that much because I don't like the neckline. But because it's a maxi dress, there's loads of fabric in it and I love the fabric. So what I'm thinking of making is a hinterland dress. And I've made one before, I made a long sleeve one, but I would like to make a sleeveless one so that I can layer it up in sort of autumn, winter. And I think I'll have enough fabric in it. I don't know. I need to see if it will be long enough, but that is my plan for that. So hopefully maybe in September I will start making that. More pressing is I need to make some cedar pants. So both of my boys like wearing elasticated trousers, but they would like some jeans that still have some elastic in them. But once you get over like 12, that's not something that's readily available in the shops. So I have come across the cedar pants pattern by Leela Makes, and I believe she's a rock climber. So it's got a really cool construction. It's got like a diamond gusset to give ease of movement, and it's got lots of pockets, and it has an elasticated back and a fly front. So I think they will be perfect, but I'm kind of putting it off a bit. I think it's the pressure of making for someone else. When I make for myself, I can try it on. I sort of know what I like. Sewing for other people is a little bit different, and there's also a lot of top stitching in it because it's got extra panels and pockets and everything else, and that feels like quite a lot. But I have the fabric, it's all been washed. I'm going to just have to do lots of try-ons and hope that the boys don't get too fed up of me, but hopefully that will happen in the next few weeks. Fingers crossed. I will update you. When it comes to knitting and crochet, I've been doing quite a lot, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I think it's an area where I've been able to absorb myself. I love a rabbit hole, and there are lots of things that I can learn and techniques that to try out. And my knowledge in knitting and crochet is not that great. And I think also because of how I was feeling last year, I associated sewing with work, whereas knitting and crochet is not work. So it was much easier to kind of divert my attention into a different craft. So that's been fun. And I've got a few different makes and quite a lot of mistakes as well. And I think probably the best thing to say as before we go into all these projects is I have tight tension. It used to be really tight, now it's just tight, but it is a common issue you will find as we go through the projects. So first up is socks, and I think I attempted socks years and years ago and didn't have much success with them. And I saw someone talking about short circulars for knitting socks. So I got myself some Knit Pro Zings, and they have revolutionized sock knitting for me. It just makes it so much easier. You're not struggling with trying to pull the cords through. I didn't get on with Magic Loop, and you haven't got the issue of DPNs, which is like trying to knit with a prickly hedgehog. So short circs for me have been amazing. And the first socks that I tried were using some old sock yarn I'd had for years. I think it's a Trekking XXL, and I used the basic sock pattern by Summer Lee. I think part of it with socks is that when I started these, I see YouTubers making socks in like 3 days, and I think, well, I can do that. Turns out I can't. But I do love these socks. They're purple, which is my favourite colour. They did take me quite a long time to make. The heel flap and gusset really does slow me down. If anyone has any tips on how to make that easier or quicker, that would be great. I think some of it is because of my tight tension, and so picking up the stitches is a little bit tricky. And I know there's different heel techniques as well, but I think this one is quite strong. The thing that's been really interesting is I wore these when we went on holiday on a 6-mile hike, and I've got narrow heels, and I always have problems with rubbing on my heels, and I did not get any rubbing at all because I think the socks fit so much better than other socks that I would normally wear. They were just really comfy. So I now want to get lots more hand knitted socks in my drawer, but I think that's going to be like a 10 or 20 year project, but you know, slowly it will happen. And I also had a go at making, again, another summerly sock pattern, which is the clog socks. And this was made with some merino that I, again, had in my stash for years. I really enjoy cables, so that was fun. Whenever I make any pattern, if it's knitting or sewing, I always try and find reviews to, and I've talked about this in a different video, I think, to sort of see how it fits different people, to get an idea of whether or not it will fit me, but also to see if there are any common things that people say about the patterns, kind of good or bad, or, you know, fit issues. And one of the things that I noticed on the clog sock was that people said that it was quite roomy in the heel, and because as I said, I've got a narrow heel, I didn't do as many increases as the pattern said. I can't remember exactly how many. It's on my Ravelry page, which I will link. I probably could have done one more than I did, but they fit really well and they're really comfy. But with the heat waves even that we've been having, these have not been worn, but I'm excited to be able to wear them in winter, so they will be hopefully getting lots of use. They're all also much brighter than I would normally go for, but as I said, it was stash, and I think they're quite fun. The next thing I've got to share, which is another finished object, is, have I got this the right way around? And I might say this wrong, the sorghum-free scarf, although I've turned it into a shawl. I picked up a skein of yarn when I went to Wonderwool from Pigment and Ply, and this is their voluptuous yarn. Voluptuous, not voluptuous, something different. It's just lovely. Wasn't sure what I would do with half a skein when it was left. I did 20 repeats in the end. I think the last repeat was using about 8 grams, 10 grams of yarn. So I think I have 4 grams left. And I finished it off with a pearled I-cord border, which gives a really lovely finish. And yes, again, haven't worn it because it's far too hot, but I'm very excited to wear it once it gets a bit cooler. Might be too big, but it'll just keep my neck really warm, right? That's what I'm going for. Yeah, lovely yarn. Pigment and Ply stall was incredible. She had so many gorgeous yarns that I could have bought, but I restricted myself to just the one. My next finished item is the Happy Granny vest by Lonica Stoop. Hopefully I'm saying that right. I made this using Drop Spell in sea green, and I used 5 balls, and I pretty much used them all up. I think there's not much left, which is good. I used the recommended hook. The only changes that I made were I've made it a little bit shorter, and I did the edging, the setup row and the actual edging with a 4.5mm hook, because I went down as she recommended in the pattern, and it pulled it in. It was too tight, it pulled the arms in too much, and it just wasn't really what I would like it to be. So I redid it with the bigger hook size, and if I hold it up, you can see it still comes in slightly, it still curves slightly at the bottom, which is obviously a tension thing, but it's much better than it was. The other change that I made was on the foundation chain on the shoulders. Because of how the pattern is written, you do your foundation chain and you put your stitches in, and then you pick up the front and go over the foundation chain. And I found, and again this could be a tension thing, but I found that there was a really big hole where the front panel was pulling back from the back panel, and I didn't like how it looked. So I used the tail end to just weave through and tighten it up, and I'm much happier with how it looks. And I also love the I-cord construction. I'd never seen that I-cord technique for crochet, so that was a really fun one to learn as well. The fit is good. I did check gauge. I didn't do a gauge swatch. I kind of did it as I went and just whipped it out a couple of times until it was right. But I think my tension might have tightened up as I went through. So it hasn't got as much ease in it as I maybe hoped. But I think it works well. I'm really happy with it. And I will probably make another one in a different yarn. I think if it was wool, it would probably be a bit more forgiving, but because of the cotton, it doesn't stretch as much. So maybe if I made one in wool, I'd be all right doing it in the same size. We'll have to see. It was a good fun make. So the last finished object I have to share is the Sabai jumper by Suzanne Muller, and I have mixed thoughts on this one. I knitted it in Creme Casole Reborn jeans, and I bought 3 skeins. I knitted a size extra small for the body and then a small for the arms, because when I looked at the pattern it seemed quite tight on the arms and I didn't want it that tight. However, I had problems when I was knitting this. It started off well. I'm really pleased with the increases and the feature on the shoulders. That worked out really well. The problem came when I got to the end of my first skein and I went on to the second one and went to pick up the stitches for the sleeve. Basically, I'm Mrs. Tickle. Whenever I have done dressmaking, I've always had to add at least 2 inches to the sleeve to get it to a point where it hits at the right length. So because I knew that I was going to be a bit tight on sleeves, I figured I would do 1 skein as far as it would go, then I would do the sleeves, and then whatever was left would go on the body. And the instructions for the sleeve ask you to reinforce the armhole with crochet stitches and then pick up your stitches through those crochet loops. And I really struggled with that the first time I was doing it. I think I had very tight tension. I was using DPNs and the yarn just kept snapping and I couldn't figure out why and got a little bit disheartened. So I started this in August. It went into the naughty corner in about September and I didn't pull it out until April or May, I think. And at that point, I got some short interchangeables and a short needle to make it easier, and that did help. But I did find there was a definite difference between the skeins on the strength of the yarn. So the first one took a lot more tension to snap it compared to the second and third one, and I don't know why that is. I don't know if it was the makeup of the yarn because it's got some recycled content in it. I wasn't sure if skeins 2 and 3 maybe looked a bit thinner, so maybe they just hadn't been plied the same. I don't know, but it's just made me a bit, I guess it's overshadowed the make, and it's the yarn is quite dusty and almost a bit, it feels a bit cottony and sort of linen-y, which I thought would be really nice, but for this jumper it means it hasn't really got much stretch. So I added loads of length to the sleeve, but when I wear it, it seems to move quite a lot. So sometimes I put the jumper on and I think it's all right, and then other times I put it on, I'm like, it seems short, and so I can't figure it out, and obviously at the moment it's too hot to wear. And then on top of that, I didn't really have enough for length, so it sits higher than I would normally wear it. So I am a bit uncertain on what to do. Options: I could redo the sleeves and make them slightly smaller. I think I didn't decrease it as much as the pattern said, because I wanted a slightly looser fit, but maybe it's a bit too loose, or maybe this just isn't the right yarn for the jumper. So I like the pattern, I like the style. I'm not necessarily happy with my version of it, I think is where I'm at. So if anyone has any ideas or thoughts, please do let me know in the comments. I did see, I follow the roaming knitter, and she used some Kremka, I think that was Kremka Sole, and to make a bag. So maybe it'd be better off as a bag. That would make it a bit stronger. But again, I just worry about the yarn snapping. So I don't know. I'm not sure. Mixed success. We'll put that away. Right, so then we're on to whips. So I've got lots of goals of things that I'd like to make, but I'm trying to focus on my whips at the moment. So first up, my version of the Nordic Bloom. So I came across the Nordic Bloom, which is a pattern by Caitlin Hunter, I think it is, and I love it, but I wasn't sure about the style of the actual vest, because I'm not sure how easy I would find it to wear. And then I saw It's a Sarah make a Calades vest adding on the Nordic Bloom colour work. And that looked like a really good option. So that is what I have done. So if you've not seen the Calades vest, it's more of a recipe. So it's a pattern that you can use with anything from fingering weight all the way up to chunky yarn, I think it is. And you have to do a gauge swatch, work out how many stitches you have per inch, and then it has lots of different sizes that you just go, right, that's the size that I'm going to do, and then you go from there. And you can do a round neck, V-neck, and it's got wide or narrow shoulders. So it does take a bit of reading on the pattern, but it offers lots of flexibility. So I figured that it would give me hopefully lots of different pattern versions that I can make. So this is where I have got to so far on my Nordic Bloom. Now I've not done colour work before, so this is a bit of an experiment, and I've also had to make some changes to it because of my gauge and the size that I'm following. The Nordic Bloom pattern didn't quite fit, so I've stretched out the flowers slightly, but I don't think you can notice, and I think it should work quite well. It is a bit of an experiment because I really wanted to make a green vest, and when I went to Wonderwool, I was specifically looking for yarn for this vest, and this was the best colour that I came across. It's from Wonky Weavers, and I think the yarn is actually meant for weaving, so it doesn't have a ply, it's like a number gauge thing, and it has a slight coating to the yarn, and it smells quite sheepy and a little bit coated. So this is a full experiment. It looks quite rough at the moment, the stitches, but when I've done a gauge swatch and blocked it, the fabric has really bloomed. So I think that will all even out and it will look lovely, and hopefully I'm doing it in the right size. The yarn is a Donegal tweed, and they also had a kind of oatmeal-y Donegal tweed to go with it as well. What I would say is that this was the green that I liked. It was the only green that I could find in the whole of Wonderwool, and the only one that they had on the stand, and they only had it in a cone. I think this weighs over a kilo. So there's going to be a lot of knitting green items in my future. Maybe I could knit a Sabai jumper in this. Might work better. What do we think? I don't know. What I've started doing, I've got a post-it note with how much this weighs, and I'm going to weigh all the yarn that I take off and see just how many items I can make from this one cone. I think it'll be quite a lot. I might end up having to dye them slightly, like just to get slight variation so I don't get too bored of the green, but I do love it. It's really nice. And then my final project is my big birthday project. So I always like to challenge myself, and I wanted to make something to remind me of my 50th, and I've got a trip coming up that I'm very excited about that I thought it would be nice to have this ready for. So I'd been on the lookout for a pattern, and I had seen the Vivi cardigan by Sari Nordland, but I wasn't quite sure about it. And then I saw Tall Tale Makes version and fell in love with the changes that she had made to it. And so I have started my own version of the Vivi cardigan, heavily influenced by the changes that Annalisa, I think it's Annalisa at Tall Tale Makes, has made, because she very kindly listed them all in her YouTube video, but also on Ravelry. So I am using Woolly Knits 4-ply, which I am holding double, and I'm using 4mm needles. I think the thing I found strange about this pattern is that the gauge swatch is in stocking stitch, but obviously, aside from in the pattern where you're meant to have stocking stitch on the side, most of it is cables, and I know that my cable stitches are a lot tighter than my normal stitches. And a lot of people have commented in the patterns about how it's come out slightly smaller than they expected. So I do wonder if it's because of that, but I don't know. I'm not an experienced knitter, but yeah, that was strange. I was expecting to do some cables as part of the gauge swatch. It has gone okay so far. I did make a mistake to start with. I didn't read the pattern fully through. I did read it through, but then when I started the cables, I didn't refresh my mind on some of the background information. So I jumped into reading the charts. And what I had missed was that I was assuming that, as with other charts that I've read, they all go from right to left. And then if you're knitting backwards and forwards, you then work back and so on and so forth. But it turns out that on this pattern, because you start with a wrong side row, your first row you started reading left to right, which I didn't clock. And so I got about 12 rows in, might have even been 16 rows in, and realized that my cables were going in the wrong direction. So at that point, I then had to draw all over the pattern and highlight things to help it make sense to me and restart, and we were off. So it's now going okay. I am knitting a size 4 at the moment. I did go for a size 3, but I don't want it to be too tightly fitted, and the 3 just seemed a bit small. When I've blocked my gauge swatch, it doesn't grow massively, so I think this will be the right size. And I'm now at the point where I'm ready to pick up for the fronts, and then at that point I will assess if I need to go for a 5 on the armhole depth and see how it goes. So like Tall Tale Makes, I have changed the panels at the side to seed stitch instead of garter stitch. And yeah, really pleased with how it's going. It's quite difficult to knit. I am finding it quite difficult to knit because the yarn is so dark. So at night times it can be quite awkward. So picking up for the fronts is definitely going to be a daytime activity. Things that I have found useful, I've got one of those neck lights with 2 LED bits. So I'm using that when I knit at night, and I was struggling with the cable where you knit through the back of loops, and thinking it was something else. So I've now got stitch markers at certain points where I was struggling, just to remind me of what I need to do at that stage. And the other thing that's really helped me with doing the cables is this little thing, which I can't remember what it's called, but I'll pop it on the screen or down below. But I saw someone on Instagram with it, I think, and when I made my clog socks, I was using a really thick embroidery sort of crewel needle to form my stitches, but it gets in the way, and I'm not a big fan of cable needles because they're so big. And so this works really well because it just, you can put your stitches on it and it just sits nicely at the back and it just folds out the way. So that's been really useful. So my big challenge at the moment is whether or not I'm going to get this done in time. I've got until September, end of September. It feels like a stretch, but I'm going to give it my best shot, and even if it doesn't get done, it will get done this year, and yeah, we'll go from there. But I am loving it and I'm very excited to get it finished so that I can wear it, which feels strange to say at the moment as we enter our whatever heat wave it is that we're having in the UK. And that then takes me on to what I've been inspired to design, which is a project bag. So this is a pattern that I started working on at the beginning of the year, very slowly, because I couldn't find a project bag that fitted all of my requirements in terms of what I wanted it to do. So I've got two here. I've got a bigger version and I've got a smaller version as well. So I'm going to be sharing more about this. I thought I would do a behind the scenes type video of designing the bag and what my inspiration for it is. But largely it's just so that I've got a very secure, easy to grab project bag. And yeah, I've been having lots of fun making it. If you'd like to follow along with my pattern design, I have got a wait list down below which you can sign up for, where you'll get first dibs on when it's available and more information about it. I'd love you to share in the comments if you're working on any big projects at the moment and what the deadline is. And if you've enjoyed watching this, please do hit follow so that you find out when my next video is coming out. Thanks for watching. Bye.